A man sleeps in the dirt of an unblemished world. The air is still. The ground is thick with the scent of unworked soil and damp vegetation. Throughout the creation account, the text uses very specific verbs. God creates, bara. He makes, asa. He forms, yatsar. He forms the man from the dust. You swipe downward with your thumb, pulling more and more data into your mind. You consume more raw information before your feet hit the floor than an ancient Israelite consumed in an entire decade. We have engineered a culture that equates the constant accumulation of data with the presence of intelligence. We assume that if we listen to enough podcasts, track enough global crises, and read enough articles, we will eventually become wise. We pile up facts, opinions, and trivia in the center of the mind, staring at the massive, chaotic mound of clay and stone, convincing ourselves that because we possess the materials, we possess a house. But a pile of bricks is not a shelter. It is just a heavy burden. This is the exact disease of the modern, hyper-connected mind. You feel the symptom of this missing architecture in your chest and your jaw. It is the low-grade, vibrating hum of anxiety that never quite leaves your body. It is the sheer inability to sit in a quiet room for 10 minutes without reaching for a distraction, to numb the silence. We are utterly exhausted because we are forcing our minds to carry the weight of the entire world's suffering, politics, and noise without any internal structure designed to bear the load. We have infinite data, but we are starving for BINAH, his hands pressing into the clay. He forms the beasts of the field, shaping them from the earth. But when the narrative arrives at the woman, we have not taken the deliberate, painful time to hew out the pillars. We have not enclosed the space. Information is not architecture. It is weather. When the storm actually breaks in your life, when the terrifying medical diagnosis is handed across the doctor's desk, when the bank account empties, when a foundational relationship fractures, your carefully collected pile of data will not protect you. Information cannot keep the rain off your head. A dictionary cannot hold up the roof. Folly's method of constant, frantic consumption leaves you, completely exposed to the elements, trembling in the wind. Wisdom demands the slow, quiet, violent work of carving out an internal sanctuary where truth can actually reside, safe from the storm. The question is not whether you desperately need this structure. The question is how you actually build it when everything in your environment is designed to tear it down. And the answer to that does not come from a king in Jerusalem, but from a shadowy master craftsman walking through the burning sand of the Sinai desert with a blueprint of heaven in his hands. The desert is loud. The camp stretches for miles. The heat radiates off the cracked earth. A man named Bezalel stands in the center of the noise. The vocabulary sharply shifts. God does not form the woman from the rib. To find the answer, you have to look at the specific action. He holds a heavy hammer. His hands are covered in soot. The smell of molten gold and burning acacia wood fills the dry air. Exodus chapter 31. God speaks to Moses. He calls this specific craftsman out of the chaotic crowd. And then God does something that has never happened before in the biblical narrative. He says, "I have filled him with the Spirit of God." This is a massive historical milestone. Up to this exact moment in the text, the Spirit of God hovered over the deep. The Spirit moved over the waters. But the Spirit had never been placed inside a human being. Not Noah, not Abraham, not even Moses on the mountain. The first human to be filled with the Spirit is not a priest. He is a blue-collar worker. He is a metal worker. He is an artisan. He is a builder. And God tells Moses exactly what the Spirit brings when it enters this man. It brings three specific things: wisdom, chokmah, knowledge, dat, and understanding. The Hebrew text uses tevuna, the direct linguistic offspring of the noun BINAH. Bezalel needs the architecture of the feminine mind. He must take the chaotic, raw materials of the wilderness and engineer a sanctuary. He must forge the heavy gold lampstand. He must carve the Ark of the Covenant. He must weave the blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. God takes with that bone, The word used here for the emergence of the feminine is an outlier. And when you trace this exact word from into thick, heavy curtains, he must hew out the pillars that will hold up the veil. The first outpouring of the Holy Spirit is not a theological download. It is a construction project. Bezalel does not need a ledger of facts to survive the desert. He needs the structural integrity to build a house where the presence of God can actually dwell. BINAH is the divine blueprint brought down into the dust of human reality. It takes the abstract and makes it concrete. It takes the theory of heaven and turns it into a physical tent you can touch, smell, and walk inside. The materials are gathered. The command is given. The pillars are hewn, but the book of Proverbs warns that not everyone builds the house. The tragedy of the human experience is not that we lack the materials. We have the stones. We have the wood. We have the time. But what happens when a life reaches its end? The materials are completely spent, and the house remains entirely unbuilt. A human life is handed out in raw, unhewn fragments. We are given the heavy stones of grief, the splintered wood of fractured relationships, and the fleeting, slipping sand of time every single morning. The materials are dropped at your feet. The Greek-trained mind assumes that simply experiencing these things will automatically make you wise. We believe that if we just survive the garden into the wisdom literature of Proverbs, it shatters our modern, Western definition of what human intelligence actually means. The passing decades, we will somehow accumulate understanding by default. We think surviving a storm makes you a shelter. We assume that living through a tragedy automatically produces depth. The same way reading a textbook automatically produces a grade. But age is not an architect. It is just a measurement of time. Trauma is not a teacher. It is just the blunt force of the chisel. To live without BINAH is the great, silent tragedy of the modern world. You can watch a person live 80 years, accumulating a massive mountain of experiences, degrees, and opinions, and yet possess no internal architecture. When the pressure comes, they collapse, because they never took the raw, chaotic materials of their life and submitted to the violent, quiet work of hewing out the pillars. They just let the stones pile up. An unbuilt mind is a terrifying place to live. When a crisis shatters reality, a mind lacking BINAH scrambles for a dictionary. It searches for a clinical explanation. It demands a theological answer for why the pain happened, desperately trying to categorize the suffering. But BINAH does not ask for a definition. BINAH picks up the stone. When grief enters an unbuilt mind, there are no walls to contain it, so it floods the entire landscape. We treat knowledge and understanding as synonyms. We think of them as abstract concepts, data stored in a brain, facts memorized for a test, drowning everything in bitterness. When success arrives, there is no structure to bear its weight. So it crushes the fragile foundation with arrogance. Without that feminine capacity to enclose, protect, and integrate the extremes of the human experience, a life remains a scattered, dangerous debris field. But what if the debris field is already your reality? What if you are looking at the years behind you and realizing you have spent a lifetime collecting data instead of carving pillars? You are standing in the middle of a ruined site. The storm is already blowing in the distance. The materials are scattered in the dirt. You possess all the information in the world, but your house has no walls. The genius of the ancient Hebrew text is that it does not leave you in the rubble, because the architect who pulled the bone from the dirt in Eden is still working. God pulled a bone from a sleeping man in the dirt, and a masterpiece of physical architecture was built. A king wrote a manual in a stone palace, and the human mind was revealed as a fortress. Wisdom raised her voice in the city street, and 7 pillars were violently hewn from the rock. Information gathered over a lifetime. But the ancient Hebrew text does not view understanding as an abstraction. It views understanding as something concrete, something feminine. A culture built an empire of endless data and realized a pile of bricks is not a shelter. A craftsman stood in the burning desert sand and the Spirit of God became a blueprint for a tent. The heavy chisel of grief struck the limestone, and a load-bearing truth emerged from the dust. The raw fragments of a human life are dropped at your feet, and the invitation to build a sanctuary begins. One root. One. Architecture. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the hewing. The violent, quiet work of striking the rock again and again. We desperately want the wisdom, but we absolutely hate the chisel. We want the finished, unfractured house, but we spend our mornings staring at a cold glass slab, consuming the chaotic noise of the world, pretending that gathering more weather is the same thing as building a wall. If you are in a season where your internal world feels like a canvas tent in a hurricane, where the sheer volume of anxiety, heartbreak, and noise is threatening to completely collapse your mind, understanding is not a ledger of facts you collect. It is a structure that holds you together. You do not need another podcast. You do not need more information. You need BINAH. You need the feminine capacity to take the raw, painful, confusing materials of your history, enclose them, and let them sit in the dark until a structure actually holds. And may the God who has never once left his people exposed to the storm walk with you into the scattered rubble of your own mind and give you the quiet strength to pick up the heavy stones and finally begin to build. If this reached something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is drowning in data but starving for a shelter. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And to feel the weight of what that means, you have to step out of the world, you know. You have to understand the profound difference between how a Greek mind thinks and how a Hebrew mind is designed to operate. You can almost hear the rhythmic, slow breathing of the man lying unconscious. God puts the human into a tardima, a deep, unnatural trance. You and I were born into a Greek world. When we think about intelligence, we imagine a filing cabinet. We picture rows of neat folders, sterile classrooms, and textbooks stacked high on wooden desks. The Greek mind, which built Western civilization, loves the abstract. It loves to take reality, chop it into distinct categories, and place it under a microscope. It separates the physical from the spiritual, the mind from the body, the theory from the practice. To a Greek thinker, truth is a cold marble statue, something you stand back from, analyze, and describe with precise, technical vocabulary. The ancient Hebrew mind does not care about your filing cabinet. If you asked an ancient Israelite to describe a philosophical concept like justice or peace, they would not give you a dictionary definition. They would give you a sensory reality. They would talk about the heavy, coarse texture of a stone scale resting in your palm. They would describe a dirt path worn flat by leather sandals, or a fig tree pushing its roots deep into a cracked riverbed. To the Hebrew mind, nothing is purely abstract. If a concept cannot be tasted, touched, experienced, or lived in the dust of everyday life, it is merely wind. Truth is not an idea you debate. It is a path you walk. And then, the first surgery in history begins. Flesh is opened. A piece of bone, a rib, is pulled from the man's side. This fundamental divergence in how the brain processes reality is exactly why we consistently misunderstand the opening pages of Genesis. We read the English words for human intellect, and we immediately revert to our Greek training. We assume the biblical authors are talking about mental capacity. We assume they are describing a ledger of facts, a biological brain capable of processing complex mathematics or retaining historical dates. But the writers of the ancient text are operating on a completely different frequency. When the Hebrew text talks about the inner workings of the human mind, it does not use a vocabulary of intellect. It uses a vocabulary of architecture. It uses words that belong on a dusty work site, accompanied by the smell of cut cedar and the sharp crack of hammers splitting stone. It describes the human consciousness as a physical structure, something that must be built from the ground up, piece by heavy piece. And to see the very first blueprint of this construction, you have to go back to the man sleeping in the dirt. You have to look at the specific verb God uses when his hands are holding that extracted bone. The man breathes slowly in the dirt. The chest cavity is sealed. The bone rests in the hands of the Creator. Genesis chapter 2, verse 20. Read it in English, and you miss the majesty entirely. Most translations offer something flat. The chest cavity is sealed shut, and from that extracted fragment, God shapes the woman. You have probably heard this story 100 times. Then the rib, which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman. Made. It sounds ordinary. It sounds like baking bread. It sounds like crafting a pot. But the Hebrew text refuses the ordinary. The word is the Hebrew verb BINAH. It does not mean to make. It does not mean to form. It is a strict, undeniable construction term. It means to build. It means to erect a permanent structure. It is the exact vocabulary of the worksite, carrying the smell of cut wood and the sharp crack of heavy mallets. Look at how this word echoes through the ancient scrolls. Noah builds an ark of gopher wood. BINAH. Abraham builds an altar of uncut stones. BINAH. Solomon builds a temple of gold and cedar. BINAH. God takes the rib. He builds the woman. BINAH. This is not a potter working clay. This is an architect laying a foundation. The text forces a contrast. The man was formed yatsar, like a potter squeezing wet mud, pressed, molded, shaped from the loose, shifting, unstable dust of the ground. But the woman is different. Most people read Genesis chapter 2 and see a simple origin story. They assume it is just a biological ledger. She is constructed from solid, pre-existing material. She is engineered. A potter works with water and earth. An architect works with weight, load, and balance. A potter shapes the outside. An architect designs an interior space, a place meant to be inhabited. Dirt is shaped. Palaces are built. Dust is molded. Sanctuaries are built. The woman is not a biological afterthought. She is an architectural masterpiece. She enters the biblical narrative not as a secondary assistant, but as the pinnacle of the physical creation. When the ancient Israelites heard the word BINAH, they saw walls rising from the bedrock. They knew it meant strength. They knew it meant endurance. But BINAH is just a verb. It is just the physical action of building. The Hebrew language does not stop at the physical body. The physical design points to a cognitive reality. If you take that root verb, BINAH, and you morph it into a noun, it changes everything. You leave the garden. You walk into the book of Proverbs, and the architecture moves from the body, straight into the human mind. The noun becomes something every human being is commanded to search for, an ancient attempt to explain where the other half of the human race came from. They read it as a story about gender. The physical construction in the garden was only a shadow of a much deeper reality. 1,000 years after Eden, a king sits in a stone palace in Jerusalem. He leans over a parchment scroll, the scratch of his reed pen echoing in the quiet chamber, compiling an instructional manual for his son. In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7, Solomon writes what sounds like standard fatherly advice to a young prince: get wisdom, and with all you're getting, get understanding. The word he uses for understanding is the Hebrew noun BINAH. It appears over 30 times in the wisdom literature, and its root is the exact same verb we just left in the dirt of Genesis. BINAH comes directly from BANAH, the heavy, physical labor of building. If the idea that your understanding is not a mental capacity, but an architectural structure is shifting how you read the text, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we dig beneath the English translation to find the bedrock. So Solomon takes this architectural noun and he gives it a body. He turns BINAH into a woman. In Proverbs chapter 9, the text declares, "Ex play, that wisdom has built her house." The capacity to process reality, to hold conflicting truths without collapsing, to discern the difference. They read it as a story about marriage. They read it as a defense of hierarchy. But if you look closer at the Hebrew vocabulary, between temporary noise and eternal weight. This is not framed as masculine intellect. It is explicitly feminine architecture. The noun BINAH carries the connotation of an interior space. Just as the woman's physical body contains a womb, an internal, enclosed architecture designed to cultivate and protect life, BINAH is the internal mental architecture designed to cultivate truth. To have BINAH is not to be a walking encyclopedia. It is the ability to take raw, chaotic information, enclose it, sit with it in the dark, and allow it to develop into a cohesive life. It is the cognitive equivalent of a load-bearing wall. Intelligence is not a ledger you fill with facts. It is a house you inhabit. Understanding is not merely the ability to perceive a problem. It is the structural integrity required to bear the heavy weight of reality without fracturing. When Solomon begs his son to acquire BINAH, he is not telling him to go to the library and read more scrolls. He is warning him that a life without feminine understanding is a life without walls exposed, vulnerable, and completely defenseless against the elements. But a house is only as strong as the columns that hold the roof up. Solomon says, this feminine architecture requires exactly 7 pillars, and the materials for those columns are hiding in plain sight. Pulsing beneath the English translation, you start to see something the biological reading completely misses. The rib is not a biological spare part. The heavy iron chisel strikes the limestone. The white dust falls in the midday heat. A woman stands in the center of the ancient city, overseeing the construction of a massive estate. She slaughters her meat. She mixes her spiced wine. She sets her heavy wooden table. Proverbs chapter 9 opens with a masterclass in architectural imagery. Wisdom personified as a woman. The literal embodiment of BINAH has built her house, and the text pauses to give you the structural engineering report. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. 7 is the biblical number of divine completion. It is the rhythm of the creation week. It is the boundary of the Sabbath rest. It is the architecture of a finished, whole, unfractured reality. The text is telling you that a mind shaped by BINAH is not missing any critical supports. It is completely stable. But look at the specific action. She hewed out her pillars. Hewing is not pouring concrete into a quick mold. Hewing is violent. It requires striking the rock again and again. It requires stripping away everything that is not the pillar, abandoning the excess stone to the quarry floor. BINAH is not a gift you passively receive. It is a structure you violently carve. You carve it through failure. You carve it through grief. You carve it by taking the raw, painful, confusing fragments of a human life and holding them before God until a load-bearing truth emerges from the rock. It is architectural raw material. The real question of this text isn't, why did God use a rib? It is this: what exactly was God building? When tragedy strikes the family, the pillar holds. When the culture shifts its morality, the pillar holds. When the harvest fails and the fields dry up, the pillar holds. To have a mind held up by 7 pillars means your internal world is not a canvas tent flapping in the desert wind. It means your internal world is a fortress. And Solomon creates a terrifying contrast. Just a few verses later, another woman appears on the same street, woman Folly. But she is not building anything. She is just sitting at the door of her house, on a seat at the highest point of the city. She is loud. She is undisciplined. She knows nothing. She offers stolen water and secret bread to anyone who walks past. But she has no architecture to offer. Folly requires no hewing. Folly requires no time. Folly is not a builder. She is a consumer. We read this ancient poetry, and we nod along. We agree that a stone fortress is better than a folding chair. But then we close the text. Step away from the ancient street and walk right back into a modern machine that is designed to actively tear our architecture down. You wake up in the dark. Your hand reaches for the cold glass slab resting on the nightstand, and the flood immediately begins. A steady stream of glowing text, breaking global headlines, fragmented theological debates, and curated outrage pours directly into your optic nerve.